Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Bibleling Pastor Podcast with the smooth sounds of Michael
and Rob. Welcome.
This month we're talking about quotes from the Ligonier Conference held in Florida, in which I'm still very salty that Rob got to go to and I didn't. So let's get into this quote that I am unaware of and talk about it a little bit, because the last two episodes, I like this. I mean, if you've been a listener to this podcast very long, you know our preparation is pretty much nothing anyway. But this here is very interesting just to react to these quotes, because there's been some, I feel, hopefully there has been, hopefully it's been helpful to you guys that have been listening too, but some good conversations that come from it. So what do we got now, Rob? Who we got? We got some more Sinclair Ferguson or not? That was
No. This is Joel Kim. You know who Joel Kim is?
I don't think I have any clue who Joel Kim is.
He's a Korean American. Korean only in that's his family's heritage, I think just a generation ago or so. He's the president of the Westminster Theological Seminary in California.
Oh, okay. Smart.
This was not during a sermon. This was during a Q&A that they were part of.
Session.
And the topic of the Q&A was discipling the next generation.
Okay.
Right. So the questions being asked were things like, do we need to disciple Gen Z differently? Do we need to change discipleship or whatever? Right. So This is kind of the premise. And then he said at one point, and this is, yeah, okay. Anyway, he's not some crusty old guy. Like he's very smart. He's probably like 40, right? And okay. Just really learned. And
I feel like I have not accomplished as much as he has in his years.
Yeah, you and me both, brother. Either way, he's written a couple of books about this kind of thing and the new generation, and done a lot of like scientific level study on some things. And he said this, I'm interested to see what you're going to say about this.
Oh no. Okay.
He said, quote, "We may just be training a new generation of Christian martyrs," end quote.
Okay, so I have like a follow-up, because you know the context of this. So yeah. Is he stating that the idea is that culture may be going in such a way that the next generation will actually have to give up possibly their lives for the faith? Is that the direction he's going with that?
He's saying that is a possibility. Yeah.
Okay.
That we have to treat it like that, essentially.
Okay. Okay. So the idea is that we're always training up the next generation as if that was. So well, he's not making a.
That's the idea behind it, but I think he is making statements that, based on the way that culture is going in America, this could be true of the next generation.
Okay, I mean, gotcha.
So, yeah.
So, to the first part, so if he's just talking about general discipleship, as in we always train people up as if that was the thing, yeah, that's important. That's incredibly important. I think that goes back to the last two conversations we've had, like the importance of knowing Scripture, because no one is going to lose their family, their friends, their income for something they're only kind of casually sure about. You know what I mean? Like if somebody says it's your job, if you don't, like you either say Jesus is Lord or you renounce Jesus as Lord or you lose your job. Most people will be like, well, I like to eat. So they'll give that part up. Now, not that it would ever come across like that. I think it would be much more of a, agree with this cultural standard or lose your job. I think that's much more, but it's still in line with it. Just it's worded different. Mm-hmm. Now, right there, not even addressing martyrdom. I think right there, we already have an issue within the church, I think, to where if somebody were today to come to most Christians and say, either sign this statement about gender and sexuality or about, I think that's probably the one thing that would come up now if we were actually to have to, choose. That would probably be the thing. But sign that or lose your job. Most people that go to church would have they'd have conflicting motivations about that. Now, on the martyrdom part, raising up that puts a lot in perspective, doesn't it? Like, if you approach discipleship as the person I am discipling, that's what, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 right now, I'm discipling them with the mindset that one day they're going to stand and have to give their lives for Christ. You don't mess around with flannel graphs and cute little stories about Jonah and the whale. You just don't. Like, your perspective's a little different. You approach that
walked up the ramp and 2 hippos after.
Yeah. I mean, so that's not your main focus. If you're going, in 10 years time, this person is going to have to die for Jesus. You just don't, I mean, you talk about Noah's in the ark, but you talk about it much differently than, like the analogy you just gave, like, 2 by 2 in a gentle voice, where God is literally wiping out the world because of sin. So, like, you don't, like, you approach that differently. So do I think that we should be approaching it that way? For sure. Do I think we even now, both of us have kids. Do I think that is our primary mindset right now, even with the culture we're living in? I think we're, by and large, lulled by the culture into a lot of other things, so we don't approach it that way, right? So because I have it so easy, and I have as many distractions as I can have, I would easily say that somebody in Myanmar, right, that's discipling their kids right now, is doing so with a much more laser focus than the average American parent. Mm-hmm. Because they know the cost of that. Like, they know, like, you could die tomorrow. So, like, this is what this looks like, which also goes back to what you talked about, or what we talked about a couple episodes ago. Like, our lives are going to preach that a lot more than our words. Like, you can stand up right now and say, I definitely give up my job for Jesus. But when that alternative is laid down in front of you, and it's, you're feeding your family or you're not, like, what, like, okay, so there's the rubber meets the road, right? I mean, now I'm going to say something that's going to make some people mad. So just, y'all, there's your warning. And you can fall on either side of this argument, and there's a lot of discussion to be had. But there were pastors that were more than happy to close their church down whenever they were told they had to do that. And they didn't even argue about it. They didn't fight about it. There wasn't even a second thought about it. Now, again, you can have a lot of discussion about pandemics and diseases and transmitters. I get that. You can have those conversations. But the fact that even now, like, you're a year into it, even now there's people that still don't have their churches open. There's still pastors that are like, no, we're not going to do it. Okay, buddy. I mean, just I'm just saying that wasn't the worst thing you were ever going to be faced with. And the fact that you caved so quickly on that and are still caving on that with no discussion. Where there's people literally in other countries that they know this Sunday, when they meet to celebrate Palm Sunday, that could be the last day they live. They know that. They know that. They know that. And they disciple differently. And I bet they use a lot less words and programs than we do, right? So all of that to say, my reaction to that quote is, as with the other 2 episodes, that's incredibly convicting, is it not? Because we go, okay, well, yeah, I read the Bible with my kids every night. We talk about it. We ask questions about it. We live our lives for Jesus. But there's a part of me that goes, I don't think we wish for persecution in any regard. And I think what we've seen within the last year is just the lightest of light touches to actually push us that way. But it has been a little bit of just a poke, a prick of where people are going to fall if something ever were to happen. So if you can't stand up to even a little bit, you're definitely not standing up when something like hard and fast comes down. And we all do have to consider, I think, like, a real thing. I don't know. Here's the thing. I'm not as educated as I could be on the Equality Act. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in there in regards to businesses and churches and things like that. But it has crossed my mind a number of times that if work, for example, came across one day and said, hey, you have to sign this thing about, you agree with this certain lifestyle or this certain train of thought. Okay. Am I prepared for that? Have I been wise enough to save enough money up to where I can now make biblical decisions in my life, to where you'll stand or not? And again, that's not even persecution. That's just that's the culture making a statement and you having to choose. That's not even persecution. That's just you having to make a biblical choice. To think that I have to raise my daughter or son up to possibly to die for Jesus. Right? That changes. I mean, I don't have a good answer. I mean, I know I've rambled for like 5 minutes, but I don't have a good answer for that, because you address that differently. And I think that's where we can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters in countries that there was, and I'll stop talking after I say this, but there was Paul Washer put something up. By the time this airs, who knows where it'll be, but he had put something up about some of the people that they have on missionaries in, I think it was Myanmar, where right now, like they don't have food. They do not know where their food's going to come from. There are people daily getting arrested around them. They're hiding. But the person that wrote this was that we still have faith in Christ. We still know that he is good. We still know that he is God, and we trust him. And that's somebody that doesn't know when their next meal is coming from, that's trying to protect and hide their family, and could possibly be arrested, jailed, or killed. Like they could be dead now. I don't know. But their trust and faith is in the Lord regardless. And I think we can learn a lot from them in regards to the silliness of we're being persecuted. Okay, well, just, take a back seat, buddy, because you're not even close to that. But anyway, man, I said a lot by saying nothing, or I said nothing and saying a lot. That's what I meant to say.
No, I think it is convicting. And I think, us as American Christians, we have had it for generations, really since America became America. Not all Christians. I don't want to go there. I don't want to get called a racist or anything. I mean, I realize this isn't true for every person since America started, but by and large, at least the past few generations, right? At least since the 60s, when sort of that fight against racism made a lot of headway. And I think it's safe to say, and if you don't agree, I don't give a crap, but I think it's safe to say that at this point in history, we have it really, really, really easy as Christians in America. Like you said, even the persecution, if you even want to call it that, that has been dealt out. So the very fact that one pastor gets thrown in jail in Canada for keeping his church open, and that has made international news, that in and of itself tells you how easy we have it here, right? They
were like, oh, that's just another pastor. I mean, what's that?
Right, yeah.
One more in jail.
Oh, are you talking about Dave or Chad, right? I mean, like, and there are places in the world that, in which, like you talked about, that are so persecuted that they have to. This isn't even a quote that would make them go. They would just go,
like, we're already doing that.
Yeah, it would be a duh quote, right?
Yeah.
But in fact, they would say, no. We may just be. No, we are, right? But I think that America is going in a dangerous direction when it comes to Christianity, right? And the way that it's looked at. And again, like we talked about in previous episodes, some of that's our fault, right?
Yeah.
We haven't done well. in some ways, but too, it's easy to forget that it's also a major spiritual battle that is beyond you and I, that is going on. And I think it's important that we take things like Matthew 10, when he sends out the 12, and he he sends out the 12 disciples, and he tells them specifically that persecution is going to come, right? In verse 21 of chapter 10, he says, brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. So he's talking specifically about martyrdom for the cause of Christ, for his gospel message. Then Matthew chapter 24, again, he talks about this again as one of the signs of the end of the age, right? That let's see, where's it at? Then in verse 9 of chapter 24, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And he goes on. But this is the picture, I think, of now, no matter your eschatological view, that he's talking to disciples, to his disciples, his 12, the apostles, capital A, not Bill Johnson, the apostles. And he is talking to them specifically about the things that they're going to be encountering in the book of Acts, that what we read actually happening. And the apostles were martyred. I mean, it wasn't odd at all. And so this is just scriptural evidence and things that happened. Paul and being beheaded, but then you move past scripture, right? And church history is filled with martyrs. There, Fox's Book of Martyrs, the two Jesus Freaks volumes, that are filled with these amazing stories of people in all kinds of countries, all shapes and sizes, all two genders, who have given their very lives because they stood, right, and wouldn't say no, or wouldn't say that this Jesus thing was a sham. And the point that I make there is simply that every instance in human history since Christianity became a thing, every instance of martyrdom is because people are standing on the truths of the gospel, the truths of the word of God, and are not letting culture, no matter how powerful, no matter how scary, are not letting culture dictate to them what the words of God mean. They're standing on it, and they're saying, no, 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 this is God's word. You're not as powerful as you believe you are, right? It is because they challenge the world. And we're clearly going into a situation where I'm not going to say that this is going to happen. I don't know if my son is going to give their lives for the cause of Christ. However, we are heading into a world that is hateful toward Christianity, like that they're enraged when we say some of the things that we say on here.
Yeah.
Right.
Easily, some of the things that we say out here can be used against us later if trajectory continues.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, there might be things that I've said on here that I wouldn't stand up and say, no, this is. But I mean, a lot of the controversial statements, like when I just said there are two genders, I don't care what you do to me. Like, I have to stand on that. Right? But I think it's interesting you brought up Paul Washer. One of my favorite things that he has ever said that has actually played a role in how I treat the discipleship of my own children is when he was talking about the mission field at one point, and he was talking about his kids, and he said there would be no greater honor. I'm probably getting some of the words wrong, but this is what he said regardless. He said that there would be no greater honor that he could think of than that his children would join the mission field and die for Christ.
Yeah.
And you could tell he meant it. It's not just something that you say. And I think so, rather than thinking rather than thinking about it like I have to start discipling my children as if they're going to be faced with that, do you believe in Jesus, with a gun to their head question, right? um I should be thinking about it in such a way that it's not I have to start doing this, but I get to have the privilege of training my children in the hopes that they will be given the most honorable thing that could ever happen. Man, read Revelations and how it talks about the
Mm-hmm.
mark. There's no better way to die biblically. There's
Mm-hmm.
just no greater honor, no better way to die, no better cause to give your life to than to stand and be burned at the stake for the cause of Christ. And we have to train them that way.
Mm-hmm. No, wow. Yeah. I mean, the only thing I have to add to that before we end this, but like, so we were covering the other night in family devotional time about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and just the first of all, just how the king is so bipolar anyway, but the idea that they, the three of them they're like, we're not going to bow down. Like, you can do whatever you want to do, but we're not going to bow down after already being, I mean, if you read the story, they had already, the king was fully aware of what their God was capable of. I mean, it's not like I think sometimes we read it and we disconnect the fact that Daniel and those three guys already knew each other, that the king was fully aware of the God of Israel and who they were. I think we see it as disjointed stories, but when they get to that point, he already knows what God's done for Daniel. But the point is that, like, he doesn't care. Like, he wants to be the ultimate king. And if they don't bow down and do this thing, then you're going to die. And the interesting thing is, I mean, he gives them a couple chances. Are you sure? Because if not, just so you know, you're going to die. And their words are basically just, no, this is the God we worship. This is whatever you do, you do it, because this is the God we worship. And I think we need to understand, again, contextually, they weren't standing in a position in which it's not like they had any leeway or like any like power there. They were a conquered people in a nation as slaves. And even in that situation where they can make it a little bit better for themselves, not only just by not dying, but just by making it a little bit better for themselves, they're like, no, we're not going to do that, even if everybody else does.
And at the time, speaking to the most powerful human being on earth.
Yeah. As well as the story is painted, they're the only ones not doing this within his purview. And the amount of courage that takes, especially, I mean, mob mentality is not a new thing, right? People bow down to lots of things, not because they want to, just because everybody else is already doing that. And they just go along with it because they have no say either way. So they just go with everybody else. But to be able to stand up and be like, no, I mean, I know what everybody else is doing, and I know Jim over here is a pretty good guy, but he's still bowing, but I'm not going to do that. And I think we just really I think sometimes we romanticize that story as, well, look how great they were. Like, there was probably a great amount of pressure there. There was probably a time where they're like, we could just, but we're not going to. And I think we need to, and we talked about that a little bit with them the other night, but I think it just comes down to, we have to have that understanding that, and again, that comes down to having that trust and that faith, like we talked about the last couple episodes, and who God is. That, like, I understand that everything in front of me seems like this is a bad decision, but I trust him anyway. And I think that goes back to, I just preached a sermon this last week in 2 Corinthians, where Paul's talking about these momentary afflictions. And his whole point is, like, yeah, it looks bad if you look at it. Like, my body's failing, but I'm being renewed inside. Like, all of these afflictions seem like they're troublesome, but they're actually bearing up within me this glory that I can't even imagine. And just having that heavenly perspective where he goes, yeah, everything in front of me looks horrible, but you're not looking at it the right way. And just having that perspective of, and like, I love how you said, it's not that I have to prepare them for this, that I get that privilege of doing that. And I think that changes how we do it. Instead of being like, all right, guys, the government's coming for you, this is how you prepare. It's much more of a, hey, guess what? You serve a good and a great king. And this is what it looks like to serve that good and great king, despite everything around you, despite what your friends are doing, despite what you're being told. It's not like okay, we got a bunker and we got 7 years of food. Let's get in there. It's hey, go live for the gospel. And that's going to hurt sometimes. But if you have that the perspective of heaven rather than the perspective of the temporal things in front of you, it changes how you do things. So that's all I got to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we do, every generation that hasn't raised up their children with that in mind has probably done a disservice to them. Because even if it's not within a generation that is even if it's a generation like ours, for instance, that grew up in a pretty safe Christian America, right? Like where it's fine to be a Christian. In fact, for most of our lives, it was a good thing to be a Christian, to have those ethics. It's only been in recent years that it's really been looked down on a lot. Even in a situation like we grew up, right? The America that was really friendly toward Christianity, and even said that it was a good thing. It's still important to raise kids like martyrs, because it creates a fire, I think, and you have such a different perspective, like because think about all of the causes that and I'm going to keep it short, right? But when we think about all the causes and all the reason, young people want a reason. They want a purpose. This is why they jump on all these different causes, most of which they couldn't defend if they had to.
Yeah.
But it's just something we dive on head first. We jump onto whatever cause, because that's what we are made to do. We're made with purpose in mind, and when we train up a generation of young Christians as if they're going into battle, because they are, as if they might end up giving their lives in that battle, because they might, then we're giving them the actual purpose that Christ gives his disciples. We're giving them the same mission with the same possible outcomes, with the same level of serious as a heart attack, right? And if we don't do that, then I think we can certainly end up with a watered down generation that doesn't look at it as this major purpose and mission in their life. Because people actually want a cause important enough to die for. we want.
Well, and if we don't have that, we'll make one.
Right. Yep.
But I think just a short addition there. I think your perspective-wise, you're entirely correct on training someone up for a battle that even if it doesn't happen, at least they're ready for. Because if you don't train someone up and the battle does come, you're not going to be able to get them ready in a week. Like they have to be ready for it, right? And I know you've been in the Marines. I've not been in any sort of armed services, but it seems like that analogy really holds over, that the reason you train in the service is that if a battle does come, we got people that can take care of it. We're not sitting over there going, hey, we'll train them if the battle comes up. Until then, they can just kind of do whatever. I mean, the idea is that you're trained so when that does come, or if that comes, you're ready to go. If it never comes, great, but you were prepared for it. Rather than just saying, oh, the battle's here, we need to get people ready. Like, it's just that you're going to lose because you're not ready for it.
And on top of that, you're training up a bunch of folks who, if that battle doesn't come, like the point where they're going to be martyrs, then the only other alternative with people who think like that, who act like that, who are that passionate and that on fire, is that the gospel is actually advancing exponentially.
Because there's nothing in the way.
Why they're here. So the moral and the end game for that whole thing is, you're going to have to kill me to get me to stop preaching Christ and him crucified.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And so the only two outcomes is Christ and him crucified gets preached and proclaimed further and further and further, and in more lives and in more ways and in more words, or someone dies and becomes a martyr and is in a book forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then other people do the same thing anyway, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
just makes it's a bigger exclamation point anyway.
No, so it's really this picture when you're talking, it's really this picture for me of somebody just advancing until they hit that wall and being like, all right, I'm here. I'm just going to keep pushing on this wall. So eventually, if you're living out the gospel, it may seem very, you're not having any hindrances, but eventually you're going to hit that wall to where you do have to make a decision. It's almost like Paul's like, well, I'm going to keep preaching, so you can kill me or I can keep preaching. So either way I win, but like, I mean, we're gonna see how this comes out. But I either die and see Jesus, or I keep preaching and people get saved. So either way, I'm good. I'm good for it.
Yeah, I love Chandler's take on that when he talks about that to live as Christ, to die as gain thing, and he just talks about how Paul must have been the most frustrating human being in the world for them, because you can kill me, be with Christ, it doesn't matter. You can not kill me, great, I get to preach more. And yeah, so it's
you want to put me in jail? That's fine. I'll talk to these guys about Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. We'll just sing some hymns and break out, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah, but
good deal. All right. Well, you have any final thoughts on that, or you all summed up?
I think I'm done, man. I mean, I think it does. If you're a parent and you're listening or watching or whatever, it is something you must consider. You know what we've been talking about. If you're not a parent and you're a young person who hasn't gotten there yet, or hasn't entered that part of life yet, and you're naturally, if you're honest, you're naturally looking for a reason, right? Like we all are looking for a reason to exist, a mission to be on, something to fight for. And so there are plenty of things that the world is going to throw at you that they will call reasons to fight for. And some of those things are gender, some of those things are critical race theory kind of things, some of those things are all the stuff, right, that we get bombarded with. And I'm telling you that there already is a fight that you were made to fight for, and it is a life and death situation. And like any battle, any war, in any real situation, you might walk away from that victorious in the end, and get called home by Christ from a heart attack or something late in life, or because he came and we'll just say it, because he came and secretly raptured you.
Reference last month.
Yeah, but either way, you could also end up being the person who unexpectedly, but because you were part of the team, because you were advancing, because of your heart and fire toward the gospel, who you might die and lay in the battlefield, right? And go back home in a casket with a Christian flag draped over you, right? Like that's a very real possibility, especially if you go serve somewhere else. So and in my mind, if I have one last thing to say to young people, there is a fight to be fought that is bigger than any fight you could ever, or more important, more weighty than any cause you could ever find in this world. And so I just want to call you to that fight, because we all have to be ready for that. When Jesus was talking in chapter 10 and Matthew chapter 24, and talking to those disciples, it really is applicable to every disciple in any generation since and to come. So we all have to be ready to give our lives for Christ, and what an honor that would be.
Good deal. All right, guys. Well, hopefully that was helpful. We will talk to you next week when we finish up this series on talking about quotable moments. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.